Welcome, everyone. Please be welcome to this dialogue den. My name is Andres Serrato, and I'll be facilitating this room. Please feel free to interact via our chat. You can ask any questions to our speakers today. With us, we have Brooke Davis and Ben Jackson from Lululemon. Brooke comes from 15 years of experience in hospitality, events, and travel, anywhere from OTAs to resorts and DMOs. While Ben is the brand director for Lululemon, leading all marketing efforts. He's worked abroad and now he's back in Vancouver and he's been with the company for over 14 years. Very short introduction, but I'll leave it to you guys. Thank you again for your time and kick it off now.
Thank you, Andreas. Your lovely intro. Appreciate that. And as Andreas mentioned, Brooke and I are both Lululemon employees, and we're happy to be here today, having a good conversation with everyone. And before we get into things, we're both based in Vancouver. It's a lovely Wednesday morning here, and we'll be spending the next 30 minutes just really going through some things we've learned in COVID. The main sort of topic that we're going to cover with you all today is maintaining culture in the work from home movement. This is obviously something that we've been experiencing and have kind of become a little bit acclimatized to somewhat over the past 7 or 8 months. But it's also caused us to really react and do things quite differently in a way. So I think the interesting part about culture is when times are going well, it's really a good backbone for us, and it's something that rolls. It's actually as important when times are challenging, and I think for most of us, we've had plenty of challenge over the past months, and so it's looking at how does that culture maintain and almost strengthen who you are over challenging times. So what we're going to talk about is we'll share some examples. We'll share what we've seen as some good wins, small wins that we've seen. We'll talk a bit about how we've pivoted, what we've learned, and then we'd love to have an open conversation with you all. So 2 key takeaways for today. We're going to talk a bit about culture and the elements that make it up, and we'll also share what we've seen has worked well and go through those. Anything to add before we jump into it, Brooke?
No, just happy to be able to share this experience with you virtually. And if you have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll keep this relatively informal. Yeah, just excited for the chance to connect.
Good one. All right, as I mentioned, 3 key parts. We're going to talk about who we are, we'll talk about the culture and the shifts, and then we'll have a good conversation. That's pretty much straightforward it. So in terms of where things are at, and like if I was to give a general overview of Lululemon right now, COVID has really forced us, as it has with everyone else, to relook at a number of things. In terms of globally, we have roughly 450 stores. Most of them are currently open. There's always different things that are causing us to close and open them that may not be COVID related. It could be we had some hurricanes on the coast of the States recently that closed a few, but for the most part, we have them all up and running, and it looks quite different if you go to a store right now. Likewise, we've seen the obvious shifts. People are working from home within Lululemon. We've closed all our offices to non-essential staff. We've seen a number of areas that have really just shifted. We put on a lot of events, and those have shifted to a more virtual space, and we'll talk about that today. Do you want to give a quick rundown of what you've observed in your industry, Brooke, in terms of?
Yeah, so being that I manage Lululemon's global business travel program, and I also do the sourcing for our major internal and external event initiatives. So my first inkling that COVID was going to be a major disruptor was back in February when we were hosting our leadership summit in Vancouver. And all of a sudden, COVID was going rampant in China. And we actually had to pause on all of our attendees from China coming to Vancouver because there was no flights happening at the time. So that gave me an inkling that this might be something major for us to contend with. And then, of course, less than a month later, I was in the process of having to basically cancel, or at that time postpone, all of our event initiatives that we had spent years working on. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate with force majeure was the term of the day, and having to, make those really challenging calls to our suppliers and partners to say, we just don't know what the impacts are, and it's not safe to have these events. And then, of course, on the other side, I had to go into triage mode with our business travel program. to make sure that we could, extract all of our employees from various sites globally and make sure that they, return safely to their home countries. So, that really just turned my world on its head. And I know that it's had such a, major ripple effect across the organization. But, in terms of all of those programs, largely they were incentive programs that really helped to buoy up the culture at Lululemon. So in the absence of that, we had to make some really, really strong pivots. And I think our company has done a really great job at doing that. And we're excited to share some examples with you.
Lovely, thanks, Brooke. And in terms of what Brooke just shared with all the pivots, all the changes we've made, what's really underpinned it has been a culture that's been built up over many years. And just before we dive into some of these examples, I think it's worthwhile talking about what actually is culture, because it's often referenced, and you'll often hear people talk about how great this culture is, or the culture is really what drives us. And it's worthwhile saying, well, what actually does make up culture? And we see there being 6 main elements, or specifically stole this from the Harvard Business Review, who see 6 main elements. And there's a few different obvious ones in there. There's first of all the vision, like do you have a clear vision for your company? And that vision should really layer through everything and be a consistent piece, a consistent red thread. There are your core values, and your values are how this vision comes to life. These are the behaviors you'll exemplify. These are the things that will actually guide you in good and bad. There are the practices, and the practices are often the values in action. And we'll share a few of these practices as we go through some examples. But obviously, the vision and values won't change a ton. Often it's the practices that have to change, and things like COVID. People are a key thing that makes up a culture. And the question is, for a lot of it, it's now out of sight, out of mind to a degree. How do you still engage those people? How do you keep them connected? How do you have them feeling like they're something when it can be a case of out of sight, out of mind, as I said? The narrative, and this is obviously something that really you tell the world about your culture and who you are, but there's also an internal narrative of the culture. Talk about that one in a minute. And finally, the place. And often, as I mentioned earlier, we have a number of stores that represent our place. We also have a number of offices, warehouses, events are part of our place. And that's currently changed a little bit. So the place looks a little bit different, which is an interesting one to get into. But with these elements, we've seen it come to life in several different ways. Before we jump into some examples, though, if I look at vision and values, it's worthwhile just me taking a minute to share what ours are, so that you actually can then see in the examples how they pull out. So our vision, first of all, or we start with our purpose, and that's elevating the world by realizing the full potential within every one of us. And this is something that's been around for a long time. We've always had it. It's that high level red thread that pulls us through. So that's the overarching piece of things. And this should show up. COVID, no COVID, that's always going to be there. Before we talk about the values, the other element I'll just share is our vision. And our vision is specifically to be the experiential brand that ignites a community of people living the sweat life. The sweat life is something that's about sweating, growing, connecting. These are 3 pillars we have. We also have a series of values, and I'll just get Brooke to share those with you.
So personal responsibility, this is something that I really, interpret as, we have the responsibility to show up powerfully in this world, and Lululemon gives us the framework to do so. Entrepreneurship, this is, I think, what creates the leadership opportunities within our company, is that we really value people running with ideas and being creative. Honesty at the end of the day, it's about being authentic and in integrity with everything that you do. Courage, the courage to show up boldly and to do brave things that maybe haven't been done before. Connection, which I think is ultimately what we're all striving for, especially in this work from home environment, is how do you stay connected despite being remote? Fun, and now this is something I think we're all in need of right now, especially with our normal outlets like music and festivals and art being taken away. But fun is something that we're trying to infuse in everything that we do. And inclusion, I think, this has been a momentous year, not just because of the COVID situation, but because of the, final, the world is coming together to address systemic inequalities from race and gender. And this is something that now infuses everything that we do at Lululemon, and our leadership team has made a commitment to create the most inclusive collective that we can. And so in terms of moving forward, this will be the through line to everything that we do. And especially within the realm of our travel partnerships is trying to create a diverse and inclusive environment.
Well said. I think one thing that Brooke just pointed out with inclusion, and this relates to culture as a whole, is cultures can change and evolve. It's not like a regular concrete thing. Inclusion was added as a value probably 2 or 3 months ago, Brooke. Like it's a fairly recent addition.
Yeah.
And this is just, us reacting to the world and ensuring that we're staying as relevant as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So some examples with those sort of pieces being the fundamental parts of our culture, just how have we adapted and flexed a little bit? I think if I look at before COVID, this is a photo of one of our offices. We call them store support centres in Vancouver. And this actually is kind of a quieter day. Normally there's probably over 1,600 people in our offices across Vancouver. But this is how it looked. And I think everyone's familiar with this scenario, like people walking, people connecting. It has a fairly vibrant feel. Obviously, if you went there now, it has a very different feel. It feels a bit like a ghost town. So the shift has been in terms of that sense of place and people and really pulling it together has shifted. And this sort of shift isn't anything new, but it's a very Zoom-based world. And what we've learned from this is the power of communication, and in particular, conveying a strong vision and also conveying connection, because in terms of not being able to be in the same place like we had in offices previously, not being able to be in, say, certain connection with each other, the power of communication, and Zoom is a tool for it. I'm not saying Zoom is now a key part of our culture. It's enabling communication. We've really been able to stay pretty strong and pretty connected. And we think of, example would be every single Friday, you will get an email from our CEO with an update. And it's usually a video message. It's usually 5 minutes or so, giving updates on what's been happening, what are we up to. Really focuses on the vision, really focuses on our values and our purpose. And so those elements of the culture stay consistent throughout. However, Brooke, it's not, and when I say an email from our CEO, that's not a personal message that Brooke and I are getting from Calvin, who's our CEO. That goes to the entire company. Other communication example you've seen, Brooke, in terms of keeping it flowing?
Well, I sit under the finance org, and the finance team at Lululemon has such a strong culture, and so much so that they were able to lobby to get a kitchen built in their office, because every Friday morning they would have a dedicated team breakfast, and we're talking 100 people. So the culture was always really strong in office, in presence together. So how do you translate that in the Zoom environment? Well, every Friday we still have a team gathering, all hands call. It's about 30 minutes and it's relatively informal. And what I love about this call is that we've built into breakout sessions. So teams can get together and replicate that kitchen hang experience. So it's just a chance to just chat about our weeks, get to know new people. And then at the end of the call, we do a 3.5 minute, 4 minute plank, and we keep incrementally increasing that. But, it's a chance for us to still live the sweat life together. We're all on Zoom together, and we encourage cameras on, but, you're always in choice at Lululemon. But this is a way for us to really just stay connected and stay bonded. And I actually really look forward to those Friday connections because, in absence of us being, in the same room together, we still feel like we're still in community together.
And I think if anything, what we've found is communication has both increased and also intensified, because what we want to have, I mentioned that narrative as being a big element of culture at the start. We really want to ensure that in the absence of narrative, people often create their own narrative. And by being really, really communicative and focusing on that, you can actually ensure that people feel looked in, feel like something bigger than themselves. It speaks a bit to that value of inclusion as well. Another example we've seen is a practice, and this is a practice that we would have around exercise. So this is a bit cliched for Lululemon showing a yoga shot, but this is a shot from one of the studios in our office. And we encourage people to go to different classes, practices, go running, whatever it might be. And obviously that practice isn't an in-person one right now. What we have seen though, and a degree of success in this, is taking that key element of connection, because that's a big part of this, taking that practice and simply put, digitizing it. I think that's the right word, Brooke.
Yeah.
And here's an example of one of the calendars that we'd now create. And this is open for anyone. It's up to you to choose to do it, but there's different elements. Brooke just talked about the sweat life a minute ago. It could be a sweating class. It could be a development class, something which Red Cool Grow, or it could be a connection session. And it's really, really making sure it's as open as possible to people to choose the example they want to go to.
And what's great is that we've been really agile in including content that reflects our new values. And so inclusion has become a real focal point. So I think I've had the opportunity in the past 3 months to attend over 10 hours of amazing content led by BIPOC experts that we brought in to really educate and inform what we're doing. As well as mental health sessions. I think that we focus on the sweat life, but it's an all-encompassing thing that reflects not just sweating, but your mental well-being and mindfulness. So, and great meditation sessions as well. So it's awesome that we have this content available to us at any moment.
I think once again, it's up to people to choose this as well. Like I'm very, very, very positive about this and like to see it. There's also days where, look, completely honest, a digital class is not the same as an in-person experience. And there've been days where I've been doing a yoga class and I've just been like, shook my head, pulled the screen down and went off, got a glass of water or something like that. The point of it is taking the opportunity to do it, having those elements of connection, not expecting it to be a like-for-like replacement, but keeping those cultural elements in there. Because I think we all know, like, there is a bit of virtual fatigue going on for sure. And Brooke mentioned about keeping it relevant. That's part of how we've looked to combat the fatigue, is by ensuring it's pivoting to what's really relevant. One other one we'll share before we want to get in and open it up for a conversation. And that's really, we've talked about the sort of sense of place with our buildings and how that's changed. We've talked about a practice. Something else we want to change to speak to that really speaks to the narrative is around events. And we've gone from being a brand that puts on regular events, like a lot in our stores. We put on some bigger ones. This is a half marathon we put on that's in Vancouver every August. There's a number of events we would do, which obviously are not happening. They're not, sorry, I should rephrase that. They're not happening in person. While we do believe that there'll be a comeback and we will see these going again, we're planning with optimism when that does happen. What we have done is taken a live person experience and used some local platforms such as Strava to create a virtual version of this. So instead of being a Vancouver-based event, what it's done is allowed it to be based in many different communities around the world. And this is an example of how they did it in Austin. Again, a scene we're all familiar with, the masks, the social distancing. Groups simply got together and created their own version of it following COVID practices. And we worked with a partner called Strava, did it through there. It was an interesting one because instead of having a 10,000 capacity person event in Vancouver, we ended up reaching 25,000 people globally. So there is something in that. And we wonder if, we don't think in-person events are necessarily going away. They're just having a bit of a breather right now. How you can do them both virtually and digitally will be an interesting one to look for in the future. Brooke.
And I would encourage everyone to look for those touch points. I think what was so successful about CWES virtually is that, you know, we made people feel like it was specific to them, and we sent every single one a medal. So every single participant received a medal. So there's a way to, you know, make tangible your experience and create that, again, that through line that will keep people connected to your brand and to your culture. And we're hopeful that we can, you know, continue to amplify this kind of model and really create this hybrid experience going forward.
You're quite right there. The elements that come through in person, the cultural elements that come through in person, also need to come through virtually or digitally, or however we want to term it. All right, we had another one to share, but given our time, and we were given a strong reprimand from Andreas when we said we were going to talk for an hour, we want to ensure we stay for 30 minutes. And this is officially a dialogue den, as we're calling it. I'm going to stop sharing now, and what we can do is just pause. If people want to come off and share their screen so we can see each other, that would be great. If you don't want to, that's okay too. But we'd love to have any conversation that you'd like to have. If there are any questions you'd like to throw out there, if there's any experiences you'd love to share with people about what's worked for you or what you've struggled with, now's a great time to get into those. So as Brooke said, you can use the chat if you want, or you can just throw out some questions, like come and ask.
Hi, can you hear me? It's Michael.
Perfectly.
Great. I was out there in Vancouver at the site event in January and met most of the people, many of the people who have struggled through this time, and many of us have been put in positions where we're not working anymore. So I'm not unique in that. But how in your business, other than selling your commodity, how do you see the marketing of a hotel chain, a DMC? What are the things that are transferable that you think to all industries in hospitality that you can pass on? I mean, is there something you can say, hey, there's light at the end of the tunnel? I'm sure you've had reduction in staffing and workforce. I believe you've had, given the situation, but others have suffered a little more. So what's transferable throughout that you can advice you can give to all?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think it's a challenging one, but I think the first step is recognizing your strengths and your core differentiators. How are you unique, and what is your offering from that, value perspective? We've been very fortunate at Lululemon. We haven't had to, do any kind of staff layoffs or furloughs. So, I think that has helped contribute to a sense of pride, and appreciation. And I just come from a place of gratitude right now, just knowing how, devastating COVID has been for our industry, and so many amazing industry colleagues and friends having now to face the prospect of unemployment with a kind of grim perspective for the next few months. But really, I would say is trying to build that community, and find what makes you different and special from what your competitors are offering, and really focus on listening to what your people are and your guests' profile, and how to curate your marketing efforts towards that. Ben?
Yeah, I think the second part is what we've observed is there were some areas that it's put a spotlight on that we needed to start working towards and working into, such as the digital space, that to be honest, we haven't really had any expertise in there before. And what that has looked like is just that event I mentioned, ensuring there's a digital component, which we do believe we're going to see in real life events come back with a high degree of enthusiasm. People are already, the same way people are quite enthusiastic already about getting back out into whatever elements of life they missed before. The digital thing has pushed us to be more into that space, and how that's looked is there's also a company called Mirror we've started working with to produce more digital sweat options for people. I think the thing I'd say is if this is forcing you to pivot, the same way Brooke was saying, look at your strengths, look at those opportunities that might be there that you've sort of looked at before, and it's just accelerating the need to go for those now. Would be it.
All right. Yeah. Tough question.
Yes.
That we have very different industries. Yeah. So thanks for that. Appreciate it. Yeah.
The thing I would say there is some parts of the business have definitely seen more of a push, and that is those the digital side of things, the e-commerce side. Certain products have become very popular for people who are at home. Then other areas have not, our events team, things like that, have not really done the same way. And our retail business it's challenging, to be honest. It's challenging logistically to run retail stores right now, and it's also challenging to work in that industry as well. So it's really all over the map. That's probably the best way I can say it.
Any other questions? I do have one question, Ben, if you don't mind me asking. Is there any percentage in budget change that you've allocated for online marketing versus actual physical marketing compared to, I don't know, maybe the previous year?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, Andreas, but I think there's definitely been a bit more of a push towards the digital side of things, because that's where we're seeing the behavior going. And in all honesty, a lot of our physical marketing efforts have traditionally laid in in an event or an experience or something along those lines. So that has definitely shifted. I would emphasize, though, we are quite like optimistic if I haven't got that message across already enough. There is sort of a belief that connection is really, really important, and you can't do that digitally. As cool as it all is for us to be on Zoom here, it would be much preferable even if we could be in a room and having that banter and that feeling and just everything that comes with it. So yes, we have increased our digital spend, but like long term, we still believe it'll come back.
Perfect.
What I find interesting right now is, putting on my business travel hat, I'm hearing from the business that they're feeling the deficiency of not seeing each other for so long, that there's, the Zoom is not accomplishing everything it needs, that there's always going to be a need for in-person connection, coaching, leadership, development. That is integral to who we are. That's part of our DNA. And that we're starting, while we can satisfy a lot through these digital platforms, we're going to need to return to that at some point to fully regain our identity. And so this hybrid model of events and digital programming, I think, is the way forward. But I'm hopeful for the, incentive industry to pick up again, and, that at least we can have optimism that our travel and events program will return sooner than later, I think.
Agreed. I think we're all thinking the same. Well, if there's no more questions, we're going to let you guys go a little bit early. Remember to log back into the other platform to get back to your general session for the rest of the event. And thank you, Brooke, Ben, for your time and for your expertise.
Thanks, Andres. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Stay well.
Cheers. Hope the weather's better there. I know, it's Vancouver.
Take what we can get.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you, everyone.